Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Today, we are going to talk to Peter, who is, someone I know and a friend as well. Peter has a very interesting career history and has done a lot of different things in his career. So I don't want to steal the thunder here. So Peter, can you talk about a little bit about yourself and where you've been? Talk about your journey and where you are today, please.
Sure. Yeah, I grew up in Tucson, Arizona, and I thought my dad and his one of his brothers had gone to the University of Arizona, which is in Tucson. So I grew up always thinking, that we never thought that my dad never let us think that we weren't going to not go to college. So we knew that high school graduation was not an end to anything. We knew that we weren't done until we graduated. And then because it was just so it was a state school, it's in the same city. You're just going to go to Arizona, to University of Arizona, and you're going to live at home. And I never thought about dorms. I never thought about any of that stuff. That was good and bad. It was good because we had these expectations set for us, which happens to a lot of families, especially immigrant families. And my dad was second generation Mexican American. Tucson is near the border of Mexico, but in a lot of ways, he was like a first generation immigrant. So he was the first generation to go to college and complete college. And not only that, in the late 50s, he also went to graduate school and he graduated with a graduate degree. So that was, for many Americans, and at that time, many American males, that was almost unheard of. There was a very small percentage that had gone to graduate school. My dad, being a minority, Mexican American in the U.S., is considered a minority, and so minorities, very few went to graduate school. So for my dad, none of us were going to get let off the hook until we had a college degree, and so then I didn't know about living in dorms. I didn't, I saw movies and things, and it looked like fun, but that was just never what was expected of us. We lived near the university, so there was no reason to live on campus, and so we just were going to go. But that was the background that I came from. And my dad said, you're either going to become, do something where you can get employed. And for him, that was either a business degree or an education degree. You either become a teacher or you work in business. He doesn't even know what that means, but he just, he did that, so we did that. When I got to the university, my mind just went, wow, because the university had changed in the 30 years since he went. And so the university Arizona is considered a public Ivy. It's one of the top 100 in the world. And so there was all of this fantastic, there were foreign students and students from other states, and there were all these majors and there was all these things. So I wanted to learn a lot of things. So the long story to get around, I went for 2 degrees. I started a finance degree at the University of Arizona, and then a friend of mine had gone to schools in the East from my high school. So I transferred. After 3 years at Arizona, I transferred. And so for 2 years, I lived on the East Coast and I went to a small school. And my other interest at the time was art history and political history and sociology and economics I found more interesting than finance. And it fit very nicely into this other set of this other major called humanities, which in other countries is called liberal arts or the letters. And so I switched over and I finished my first degree after my 5th year of college. I got this rounded, multidisciplinary degree called humanities, but I continued my economics because economics is both for business and for sociology. And so I really liked that intersect. So I went back to Arizona for 1 year and I got another degree. I completed my first degree in economics. So those are my 2 degrees. And then we'll flash forward a little bit for the topic of today. 14 years ago is when I started as a finance analyst, not a financial analyst. So one of the things we wanted to talk about today was financial analyst typically sounds more like somebody who works for Fidelity or for one of the brokerage houses where it's setting up a financial planning for individuals or groups or trusts or whatever like that. This is finance analysis, where it's taking the monthly results from accounting and analyzing the business performance and then reporting that business performance 99 times out of 100 internally. So you have an internal audience to the organization, and you're reporting on what the performance was from the month before, from the quarter before, from the year before, and then showing them how the performance is trending in all sorts of different areas. But in a nutshell, that's what we do. I started that when about 14 years ago, and I had done a number of other things before that. But in the long run, looking back, all of my experiences had been some version of analysis, some version of financial budget analysis, and so that's how it kind of got to where I am today. That's the overarching version. We can get into some of the details.
Amazing, Peter. And I think just listening to all that you've done, and the fact that after you graduated till 14 years back, there's also, it looks like there's a gap that is very, very interesting there. And you and I talked about it before we started recording. So I think that's going to be another podcast as well, Peter. And so another thing is, I think this is the first time I'm doing a podcast on a Sunday evening. So this is the first time I'm also doing a podcast with a glass of whiskey. So cheers to you, Peter, and to everyone watching and listening as well. So amazing, Peter. So firstly, thank you. I think you explained the role of finance analysts and what they do. So can you maybe deep dive a little more into what this role is, please?
Yeah. So what we do? Okay, let me step back a little bit. 80% of an organization hates finance, hates accounting, meaning they would hate the idea if they had to do it. Really, accounting, that really scares them. And then the other thing is finance. And it's weird because I tell a lot of people that finance analysis is nothing more than your very first semester, or the first half of your first semester of algebra. That's it. It's arithmetic, and it's a little bit of algebra, just past percentages and ratios, and that's it. There is no algebra 2, there is no geometry, there's certainly no calculus, there's certainly no college algebra. I mean, there is nothing else. It is just a little bit of algebra, and that's it. Now, the reason why they don't like that is because you're responsible for the details, and it's true, the devil is in the details. So gathering all the information, being a liaison between accounting and management and sales or marketing or whatever, that's your role. You also have to be like a diplomat. You have to be an interpreter. You're kind of like you would work at the UN. You would be one of those people in the booth with the headphones on, and you're speaking. You're listening to one and you're translating in the other, and you have to even be understanding at the same time. But you have no time to yourself often. That's about 1 week out of the month. But that's your role. And then on top of that, you're not only required to analyze the data, be responsible for the data, then you more and more year in year, you have to visualize the data. And all that means, that's a fancy term, but it just means create a table, create a graph, create 12 different versions of the same graph, just to make a pretty picture, because the executives, the managers, whoever needs to consume the data, they don't have time to really study the table and get it. They don't have time to look at all the base data. They just want to see a summary, and then they want to see a visualization, a representation. What did well, what did really badly, what stayed the same. And I only want to worry about what went well and what went badly. If everything else is kind of meeting expectations, there's no reason to worry. But you're responsible. The flip side of being responsible for it is, because you're in finance, it's like it used to be an e-ticket at Disneyland, right? The best rides, they used to have a book of tickets, and there were very few e-tickets, but the e-tickets let you onto the best rides, the Pirates of the Caribbean, the Matterhorn, all the really good rides. You can be very, very young, but if you are a good finance analyst, you will be let into the senior top meetings more and more frequently, more earlier than people your own age. You will get into decision-making settings. And that's what I found most exciting. In one sense, I had always been looking for this kind of key. How do I get into the room with the bigwigs and hear what's going on? I just wanted to be there. I didn't care. I never wanted to be a CEO. I never wanted to be a vice president. I just wanted to be there and hear what those people talk about. Well, not only do you get to hear, they turn around, they'll know you on your first name basis, and they'll turn around and be like, Peter, Agnel, what's going on? And in our job, we get the same kind of thing. We're on the IT side now, but it's still, we're in these meetings with people that are running a Fortune 500 company, a Fortune 100 company, Fortune 50, I think, company,
Mm-hmm.
one of the top companies in the world, and they'll just turn to us on a first name basis and say, why is it? And you're like, oh, hopefully I have the answer. And that's the flip side. That's one of the other things we'll talk about in a second, is that one of the keys skills is staying organized, but that's not the only skill. So that's what I think the essence of being a finance analyst is. And that's what when I am able to derive joy from it, because it's a very hectic job, that's the joy that I derive from that.
Hmm. So you spoke about data, Peter. So I have a few questions around data, but before we get to that, so you used the term financial analyst. You probably said finance analyst, and
Yes.
then there's also this very cool term that's going around, which is called a financial advisor, right? So someone who advises you on what to do. Can you maybe quickly, at a high level, talk about the differences between the three of them, Peter?
So financial advisor is more on the sales side, on the personal side. So that is, like what I was saying, somebody who works for Fidelity, somebody that works for T. Rowe Price, somebody that works for that kind of thing. That's a similar role, but the role is geared towards a set of goals and needs that people or their families have, and that needs to be certain products need to be delivered to them, or they're encouraged to participate in that. Finance analyst is business finance, the finance side, the finance performance, the financial health of an organization, whether it's a nonprofit or a corporation. And those skills can work for a small mom and pop company. They can work for a Fortune 500 company. They can work for a nonprofit. They can work for the government. Everybody needs to know how they're doing to their budget or plan, but the budget is usually the plan. And what is the month-to-month, quarter-to-quarter, year-to-year performance towards that budget? Is it above expectations, below? And then the second question is always why. You can't just, many finance analysts will just present data and leave it at that. There'll be a set of graphs and a set of tables, and then they really won't add more value. That's a value, but it's not enough value. And they'll just say, well, these are the results. And then the second question is, okay, thank you. And then why? Well, that's what we'll talk about in a minute. You have to be prepared to go 2 levels deeper so that you can just point them in the right direction. Then they have an idea of what's not going right. And then they can go off and, they can do that. That's when you become a rock star. Is not much more than that. And you will be a rock star to management. But if you're not, then you're not going to be a rock star, and they'll just, they'll ignore you. But you don't want to be ignored.
Yeah, let me prod on that a little more, Peter. Is how does a finance analyst add value to a company then?
Yep. So what you do is you give multi-layered results. So you say, here's how we did at the top level last month. Here's how we did at multiple levels last month. Of those multiple levels, let's take a look at these 2, which are either really good or really bad. And then now within those levels specifically, let's look, and there's 4 parts of each one that are troublesome. That's what we call about drilling down. You drill down the problem. You take them on a small journey. You get 5 minutes, 10 minutes with top management, but in those 10 minutes, you got to tell them, here's what went well, here's what went okay as we expected, here's what did poorly. And typically you're going to look at what did poorly. And then you're going to want to go in and break that apart. And it's in your data set. You can, if you set up your data set correctly, you should be able to just segregate it. And you just point to these areas and these 6 areas were our problem children within these 2 larger areas. And it's like the babushka dolls, right? The Russian babushka dolls. It's the big doll, you take it off. It's the smaller doll.
One inside the other.
Exactly, one inside the other. And you just keep drilling them down until you find the ones that were the problem children. And then from there, business can take over, because talking. So a CFO or a CEO can turn to his manager and say, hey, why was this a problem in your area? And he says, oh, yes, that's right. Based on what we were shown, yes, these 3 areas, and when the areas can be anything, it can be, and this is where we get back to data. It can be a customer, it can be a product line, it can be a region of the world, something. But if you're able to lead the conversation there, then you can hand it off, and then the business managers can have that discussion amongst themselves, as to where their problems are. And so that's how you add value, is you give sort of triage as to how the year is going to perform during the year, so that the management can do what they can to fix their performance or re-steer it, or both, and then make lemonade out of lemons, or make sure that the steak is going to become beef bourguignon and not a hamburger. Literally it's that kind of thing. So that's where financial analyst is key. It's right in the middle. It's like it literally is a cog, but you're an important cog.
I think the more you're talking about this, so I'm a data guy, Peter, out and out. So the way you're talking about it, it's getting me more and more excited about asking you the data questions. But but before we get to that,
sure.
What I'm hearing is eye to detail is very important. But can you talk about what are the other skill sets that are needed in the space, more for either an aptitude, from an aptitude perspective or from an attitude perspective? What are the skill sets that are needed to make someone in the space successful, Peter?
So you need to be half geek and half personality. And personality doesn't mean you have to be, the rosiest person or whatever, but you need to be ready to speak, right? Typically, let's just talk about stereotypes for a second, and we're not judging, but I'm just going to use stereotypes as a shorthand for speaking. Typically, we don't think of accounting people as being very open or very, engaging, or, in that sense. Yes. But they like to sit and focus on the numbers, and the focus on the numbers minute to minute, day to day. At the end of the month, those numbers are compiled, they're adjusted, they're approved, and they're released. Finance people typically take those numbers and then reanalyze in a management sense. So you have to be aware of what management wants to hear, and then you need to turn around and then be able to talk about it. So it's almost like the sportscaster, right? The sportscaster looks at all the performance data, per player, per situation. They look at the team standing results. They look at the results of the games of the previous week, and it's too bad that I apologize if people are not into sports and listening to this, but it's that kind of engagement where then you turn around and you make a newscast out of it. And there's sports programs, there's Sky Sports, there's ESPN, there's other sports channels around the world, but those sports people essentially are reporting on the previous day, the previous year, the previous season's performance. And so it's that kind of role for the finance analyst. Is you have to dig into the details, you have to get very, very detailed, stay organized, and make sure that all of those stats add up and are consistent, that you've broken them down and rolled them back up. And then you turn around and you're like, this tells us this about this player. This tells us this about this team. This tells us this about this season. And that's kind of the role that you have. It's not just a boring financial analysis. I don't even like the finance channels like Bloomberg and Fox Business, because those are more on the market, but they rarely get into the business performance. A couple of times they'll mention, business P&L. You are the P&L. You're in that. You are in the internal playing. You're the middle of the orchestra, the middle of the professional team. You are in the middle of everything, and that's a fun place to be overall. Day to day, we can have other podcasts about day to day, but year over year, that is a fun place to be, because you are into things that. And many different tentacles you're into, depending on your role. You can be into a lot of different areas that even the workers, even the producers of the work, or the salespeople, have no idea what the other parts of the business are doing.
Interesting. So you mentioned a couple of sources, Peter, but are there sources that you recommend that people in the space maybe either watch or listen to or read, in terms of books, podcasts, blogs, television channels, YouTube channels, anything that you would recommend, Peter?
I'll circle back with you and I'll give you one link, and I've forgotten her name right now, but for financial analysis, there are bazillion YouTube resources, but there is one person. She's very, very good at visualization and Excel, but because overall, the first thing you're going to have to know is you're going to have to know Excel. The second thing you're going to have to know, and I've been very reluctant on this because I can do a lot with Excel, but it has to be either Tableau or Power BI, because after you analyze the data, you have to drop it into an application that lets you visualize. Has to make and visualization, remember, means pretty picture. You have to turn the complex numbers into a pretty picture. And so Tableau and Power BI allow you to make a pretty picture. Typically, we rely on Excel to also make the pretty picture in different kinds of charts, but really you need to make them dynamic pretty pictures, and dynamic pretty pictures are Tableau and Power BI. And then from there we can go on and become more complex, but at its core, that's where you are, as a finance analyst, that's what you're responsible for. Make the first pretty picture. If that pretty picture is so successful that they want it to be a real-time movie, then that finance analyst will have to get with now us in our role in IT and say, how do I improve this pretty picture, and how do I make it real time? And there's a bunch of other considerations, but that pretty picture at first has to be conceived by the finance analyst, because he works so closely, or he or she works so closely with the business, that he or she understands what the business wants to see, how they want to see it. Then we can bring in even more help, and we can figure out how to make it easier to show that picture. So I hope that answered your question.
Yes, it definitely does, Peter. And in fact, I think the analogy that I generally give is, how there's the saying that a picture is worth 1,000 words.
Yes.
What Tableau and Power BI and Google Data Studio and all of these things do is basically the data form of that.
Yes.
Like, a graph, a chart, something where you visualize it is worth 1,000 lines of code or data, right?
Exactly.
It just tells so much more of a story than.
As a matter of fact, they think about how many times we've worked on projects where it is literally thousands and thousands of lines of data, millions and millions of records within related databases that we've pulled together, and it all comes out in 3 lines on a graph. Like so many times, it's like, all this work we do, we put all this data from all these different resources, we do all this calculations in the background, and then when we see the Tableau result, 3 lines on a graph. That's it. And you're just like, and we're always really proud of ourselves because we know how much work went into it. But management is like, oh yeah, how come we couldn't get that earlier? It's only 3 lines on a graph. And like, okay, well, that's a whole nother story. But yeah,
yes.
but that's what it needs to be for the consumer. It needs to be seamless. It needs to be flawless. It's like we were talking about movies. Hollywood and Bollywood movies are so complex that watching them being made is one of the, for me, even, I love movies. It's the most boring thing in the world. But when it comes together at the end and you have even a 30-second commercial or a 2-hour movie, it just seems like it's effortless and it was easy, and you understand it and you were moved and you had, a range of emotions. In a way, that's kind of the same thing with our analysis. It just comes off as 3 lines on a graph. And management is happy, we're happy, and we go on to the next nightmare. And it's corralling the data is like herding cats. It's a nightmare.
Yeah, no, that's very true, Peter. So another question, right, Peter, is when I look at finance analysts and people who analyze a lot of this stuff, I, at least at the top of my mind, I'm thinking when it comes to graduating degrees and stuff like that, maybe a degree in finance or accounting or math or something like that. So can you maybe talk about the catchment areas or the pipeline of how finance analysts are created, and where do they come from, Peter?
Yeah. They typically will ask you to come from the business school or from mathematics, from data. Sometimes they will allow you to come from IT. You do have to have an understanding of the business cycle. You have to have an understanding of the business functions. You certainly have to have an understanding of production and sales and marketing and accounting and also finance management. You have to have an understanding of that. Whether it requires a full degree or not, I'm kind of skeptical about that, but it is easiest for them to find entry-level people from those areas, and then certainly from math and from IT, because now I can say for at least the last 20 years, it's become more and more reliant on software apps that join the finance, the accounting results with the finance reporting applications. So yeah, there has to be that awareness, and if you have a personality on top of that is willing to stand up every month or every week or every day and answer questions to people that have no understanding of what it is you do in the background, that's a plus. But but that's the way to start. Now, in your career, if you don't have those goals, you could be drawn into more and more work with finance people and with accounting people and with IT people, and you have the opportunity, or you maybe you're afforded the opportunity by doing that kind of work to learning more of those skills. You can take a back door into it, which is what I kind of did. I had finance related jobs, which were not quite a finance person, but was really on the cusp of that. And so I learned jargon over time. I learned, some of what was happening over time. I did understand certainly what was going on in the business because of my other responsibilities, but I built a set of skills that also would be what the college graduate with rudimentary business skills has. No matter how in depth a business school says they are, you only graduate with rudimentary understanding of business. When you work in an organization, you learn all of the people skills, the political parts that go into it, the parts of the business that that a business wants to grow or wants to cut out, and that's something that can't be taught in business school. So you can work back around into finance. There's a very good book by David Halberstam called The Reckoning. And in that book, he follows the rise of Nissan and he follows the rise of Ford. And in Nissan, there was this continual, it became what became in the 80s was the Japanese method of manufacturing, where it was, constant process improvement and product improvement. And the American automakers at the time were maximizing profit. So there was more in America, there was more reliance on finance and profit performance versus the Japanese model and the German models, where there was more emphasis on product performance and product fidelity and customer satisfaction through product. And that was how they raised their profit. And so he examines that. But one thing that he realized in Lee Iacocca, who became the CEO of Ford, one of the ways he became good is that he was a natural marketing and product developer. He loved designing cars. But what he realized that he also needed to understand was finance. He needed to understand, how do you explain a new product that you want to roll out? Well, the only way to do that is to understand you have to make it financially viable, and you have to be able to tell that story. So he spent about 7 years in the finance department. He left design and he went to work in finance, and he worked his way up in finance. And then he understood, okay, anytime I want to do something, I need to show the return on investment. I need to show that return on investment is very high, that what we're investing in this change is going to be very low compared to how much return there's going to be. So that is business acumen. And you only develop business acumen and you refine your business acumen year over year by working in an organization. And then you start to see where roles in a corporation begin to overlap. You find places where you can see places where you could make a transition. That's a whole nother set of podcasts, but that's, you give yourself that ability. So to start, you would probably have to start from a business degree, but if you're in an organization, you probably want to take on more responsibilities that touch on finance if you wanted to move into finance.
Interesting. So we spoke about the upstream, Peter, but can you also talk about the downstream, meaning once I'm an analyst, what else can I become in an organization? I mean, I think you took the example of someone becoming a CEO, but what are the other next steps in the career that exist for someone in this role, Peter?
You can work very closely with, I learned this when I did one of the roles of finance that I've done is project finance. When there's a special project or there's research and development, if you're a good financial analyst and you've got good answers and you're very organized and you're articulate, the management that let me step back a little bit. Typically you work for a finance organization, but what they'll do is they'll make you a dotted line to a project or a group, so that you're serving them, but you still belong in the HR organization. You belong to finance, but you really belong to this group, whether it's sales or marketing or research and development or something. So I had worked a lot in project finance. What I found was I very quickly became a partner. By hook or by crook, I became a partner of the project manager, and the project manager in larger corporations will be responsible for large chunks of, multi-million dollar, like 100 million, $200 million projects, and you're the person responsible. So you become a little mini CFO, and that project manager, who's like a mini CEO, he turns to you and says, where are we? What are we doing? How did we do? Why did this happen? Where is it? Like, tell me, how do we fix it? And you build your network very quickly on a professional day-to-day basis with some people that are very, high up. That's just something that's very valuable to you, but also very valuable to the organization. And that's what I was saying at the beginning. You get into the role of a finance analyst, you get into some positions that are very high. And so you can move. I did the first person that I replaced as a project finance analyst. She moved into project management. She then switched. She left finance and got into that role. Our same project manager then began to mentor her, and she took the additional courses, and she became a project manager. And she's been doing that now I've been doing this for 14 years, so I guess she's been doing it for 12. And she's been in project management. I think she's moved up out of that to manager of project managers, and that's what she does. So there's a lot of opportunity. If I did that in a sales way, I could move into sales support, management, or move into sales if that was something that was interesting. I did move into sales one time for a few months. I didn't like it, but marketing analysis, you move in with the marketing managers and you start to see, it's like, hey, these campaigns work great, these campaigns work badly. You learned over time why. You always saw that which ones worked and didn't. You learned why from them. And so you just pick up this ancillary knowledge, because to become better at what we do, we have to understand, what do these numbers mean? We have to have these conversations with these managers. That builds your acumen at a much higher level than typically a lot of your peers would. And so, yeah, then you just being there. What is it? Groucho Marx said 90% of success is just showing up. And it's true. It's like, just show up, just be there. You're going to be there for the conversations. You're going to meet these people. You're going to see what their problems are, and then you're going to see what the solutions are. And that in itself will make you ready to transition out when you're ready to transition out.
Very, very insightful, Peter. So another thing, right? I mean, you mentioned jargons, and I just want to throw a jargon at you that I've always heard is FP&A,
yes.
Right? So can you just break it down for someone who's completely new and does not understand anything?
Sure. So the top of the pyramid of a finance analyst organization is typically the company's FP&A group, financial planning and analysis. It's where all of if you can imagine that there's financial analysts spread out all over the company, and then they have an organization that rolls up, their financial reporting rolls up. And all of their financial reporting rolls up to this group called, it's the top of the pyramid. It's not really a hierarchy, but it's where it all rolls up. The financial planning and analysis group. Typically, this one will be where the controllership meets the finance analysts that deal with taxes and tax benefits and so on. Accounting, the head of accounting might roll into that also. All of finance comes together, and then they make sure that it's all put together in a way that then can report out from the company to Wall Street, to the federal regulators, to whoever else the company needs to answer to, maybe a parent company. This is called financial planning and analysis. One of their major roles, the easiest way to think about it, is they coordinate all of the annual budget forecast. So all the reporting that you've done during the year rolls up to FP&A somehow, and then that validates when your particular organization redoes their budget for the next year. They're going to rely on all the reporting that you and all your peers have done. So FP&A is kind of like the apex of it. That doesn't mean that they're the best financial analysts, but that's just a role where they have to do things that put it together. And the biggest one for most of us understanding is that's where the budget for the entire organization gets put together. And then all of the next year's analysis gets put together against that aggregated budget. So the aggregated reporting gets put to the aggregated budget. That's the easiest way to explain what that is.
Okay, so I definitely have to make friends with people in that group if I need funding for my projects. It looks like, Peter.
Yep, and, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But thank you. I think you've explained it very, very well. And I'm going to shift gears a little bit,
Sure.
Peter, and talk about my favorite topic, which is data. So can you talk about, so you of course, you mentioned, Excel and Tableau
Right.
and, Power BI and Google Data Studio
Yeah.
and so many different things, but can you talk about the source? So how does the data even come to an analyst?
So during the month, every single day, accounting people, whatever their function is, accounts payable, accounts, revenue recognition, that all gets entered into an accounting software, and that accounting software is called an ERP, an enterprise reporting program, platform. There's different ones. If you're a small business, it's QuickBooks. If you're a large business, it's SAP or Oracle. There's other ones that we've seen, JD Edwards, Sage Pro. There's all different manufacturers of large accounting systems, but there is an accounting software, and then there is an agreement. So every month will end on an agreed upon day. So if it's, let's just say it's calendar month, every 30th or 31st, that month ends. And then what happens is there's 3 or 4 days that are given for the accountants to take a look at their results and make some changes or additions or corrections. After that 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th day, they then accounting will tell finance and the corporation, we're done. And so now we've and it's called closing the books. We've closed the books for the month. Now anybody can use it as historical data. So on that day that those books are closed, that goes out to us finance analysts, and then that's when we jump on it and we want to grab that data and it's like, this is how we did on the month. We start downloading it and we start dumping it into Excel or Tableau or Power BI, and we start making our graphs and our charts and start digging into it. And we're given 2 or 3 days to do our analysis, and then usually on the 10th day, we start reporting. Maybe it's the 10th day, maybe it's the 7th day, just depends. But we turn around and we start reporting to management. This is how we did. And so and that's called a business cadence. So this day the month ends, this day accounting says it's good, this day the finance analysts start downloading the data, then this many days for them to analyze it, and then this day they start reporting, and that will happen every single month. So that cadence is the step by step of what we do. The data is controlled by a lot of different numbers, account codes, and a lot of different there's nothing else to call it but codes. That's where it starts to get really, really complex, where these are accounting codes, these are areas where things are entered and segregated, and then there's a whole bunch of hierarchies of these codes and the data that you have to get to know very quickly, so that you know what's coming down to you in these big tables of information. So yeah, on day 6, it's your responsibility to do a download. You do a download, you better know which of those codes you're responsible for and what they mean. You have lists, you have manuals, you have instructions, but that's where we start getting into the day-to-day churn of it. But you need to understand that data so that it comes out with what you're expecting to see. You didn't need to do an immediate high-level check, a sanity check. This looks right, or wow, this doesn't look right at all. And you go back and you start asking questions, and you need to know which people, either the accountants or the IT people, are these numbers okay? If they're not, why? Did it get messed up? Do I need to? You start doing troubleshooting, and so you need to be willing to do troubleshooting as soon as you're doing your data. And with the idea, it's like, if I don't find out the answer, I'm going to get asked, and if I don't have the answer, I'm going to get in trouble. So it's it's data fidelity then. So we all deal with data fidelity, but that's one of your roles. You need, as a finance analyst, you need to be ready to answer some data questions, and so you need to be comfortable being ready to turn on a dime and it's like, this doesn't look right, or this looks fine, I can keep going. And that's not something that a lot of finance analysts think that's their role. They're just, they either might be reluctant to do it, they might not care to do it, but it's really, really important. And that's where if you're a good finance analyst, you get good at being comfortable with the data. That's why sometimes finance analysts transition over to IT, like I did last year. You know, it's like you've worked with this enough times that it's like you begin to understand what the issues are. You start to hear the terminology, or you know, the BODs failed, the EFT, you know, the ETL failed, you know, something failed, you know, the refresh of the server failed, you know, just terms like that. You begin to understand, oh, okay, this is a 24-hour problem, or this is a 10-day problem, like, you know, we've seen before, where, you know, sometimes the whole system is down for, you know, crippled, or there's, you know, or there's other times where, oh, it just needed to be refreshed, or sometimes you pull the data too quickly. You know, the data wasn't refreshed yet. You were supposed to wait till a certain hour in the day. Don't pull the data before then. And then, you know, little things like that, but it goes a long way.
So you mentioned something, Peter, around data fidelity, especially in today's world where we have, I don't know, Google, Apple, I mean, Microsoft, Amazon, Saudi Aramco, they're all trillion-dollar companies. So it looks like data fidelity, and especially with Wall Street, you know, breathing down to like kind of figure out what's happening and, you know, how things are. So it looks like data fidelity is extremely important. I think, you know, it's never been more important than it is today, and it probably has been for the last few years, especially with so much scrutiny from Wall Street and investors and stuff like that. So can you maybe talk, you know, maybe dive a little deeper into data fidelity? Why is it important, and how is that worked on, Peter?
So you need to be this. I think I touched on this earlier. To be a good financial analyst, you have to be very detail oriented. And what you do is you find a system, but what you do is you make sure that you save your correct work in a way that you can just turn right around and you can rely on it, right? So every month, as a finance analyst, we are working on data that is frozen. So there is a right answer. That's the good thing about working in finance. There is a right answer. We use the phrase tying out. We know that we work on a day where we can turn around and say, what's the number we're supposed to tie out to? We can say, what's the number that is the official subtotal or the total or whatever it is. We can find that out. But then what you do is you make sure that when you finish all of your analysis, you save the final version of your work in a specific area, the same place, at the same time, every single time, so that you build up your own library, your own history that's official and that you can rely on, and that you can then turn around, and it's saved in a way where it's backed up. You're backing up the backup. You have your own backup. You know, you have multiple redundancies, but that way you can turn around and say, if you get an answer that's, say, $100 billion and it's supposed to be $50 billion, you can turn around and say, all these months it was leading up to, you know, $100 billion, and now you're telling me that, you know, that's 50 billion. There's no way. It's like you're almost your own best lawyer. You know, it's like, no, the evidence doesn't back this up. And that's what every system does. The backups are always the most important thing. The backups have to be placed someplace where it won't fail if the system fails. It has to be, you know, almost airlocked in a way to where you can turn around and say, no, this is, you know, if the history doesn't bear it out, or, you know, it's like, or tell me why. And so it just gives you a confidence basis to stand on. You have a confident foundation that you can stand on to say, this is why I don't think something's right, or this is why you're saying it's this and I'm saying no, that the results that we got are correct and you're wrong. You have to have a foundation for that. So the only way to do that is staying organized, keeping your work or your phases of work during the month, you know, kept in a certain way so that you can say, no, this is what it always looks like. You know, I've seen it for 18 months or for 24 months. It's always looked this way. This month, it doesn't look that way. And so then that's how you know there's a problem as a starting point. That's the most simplistic starting point, but you're responsible for keeping your own foundation, and that makes you valuable. And so then again, that just gets back to knowing the data, you know, so that, you know, month after month, you've been doing it correctly. Your process is correct.
Amazing. So when you're troubleshooting, let's say we have an issue, Peter, right? And when you're troubleshooting an issue, is that generally an IT related issue? Is it an accounting issue? Is it a business issue? Is it a combination? Can you maybe talk through some of the troubleshooting that you do if you
Yeah,
see something amiss, or
yeah,
like you said, some load hasn't worked or a bot hasn't run or something
right.
like that?
So when I talk about keeping everything really organized, right? I will want to deconstruct and reconstruct. So I will get a number that says $100 million, but I want to break that up into 17 major portions that
Hmm.
I also track. And then of those 17 portions, I want to go another level deeper and another level deeper beyond that. And so when I have to troubleshoot, I can go back and I can look at the lowest levels. So let's just say there's 100 accounts of the lowest level. I can automatically recreate the summary of those 100 level accounts. And I can see in the month that we have a problem, I can then pinpoint and say, okay, it wasn't with this group, it wasn't with this group. Okay, now I'm going to look at all of the subgroups together, and I see 98 of them are okay. They seem to be flowing along fine. And now I can say, these two, that's the problem. Now I've done as much troubleshooting as I can at my level. I can turn around and take a screenshot and present that back to the IT support. And I can say, is it our IT problem? And they'll say, no, it's not. That it's coming through the way it is, and they'll show me something. I'm like, okay, it's not IT. I go to accounting, or I might do it the other way around. I might go to accounting and say, is this the number I'm supposed to be getting for these little spots? And they can, more quickly run something, and they'll be like,
Hmm.
no, you only got half of it in these two. And I'm like, okay. And it's in your system. They say yes. So then I know, oh, now I got to go to IT, and they're like, hey, there's a disconnect. But I can eliminate a whole bunch of things to look at with really good confidence. That makes me valuable also internally
Hmm.
to the accounting department, to the IT department. They'll be willing to take my call because they know that I look at certain things, first, and I can isolate it. So that's part of you can't do that if you don't keep your history and you don't, do your own work. You become more valuable that way. You can take something that you did once, you have enough, details, you can resort it. Yeah, that's a big help to everybody. Huge help, actually.
Amazing. Okay, thank you, Peter. So you clearly have a lot of experience in this space, Peter. What is your advice for someone, either early career, mid career, or someone at any point in their careers who's looking to get into the space?
The easiest thing, the one tool that we have right now that is quote unquote universal, you have to learn Excel. You have
Hmm.
to learn Microsoft Excel. You have to know it. The parts that you know of Excel, you have to learn backwards and forwards. You should learn it at the advanced level. There are maybe, I'm just going to make up a number, but I could probably back it up, maybe 30 functions that are in Excel that you should understand and you should be comfortable with. And of that 30, maybe 20 of them you know very well and you can just do off the
Hmm.
top of your head. Functions and equations are really, really important because that really is computer programming. There was a really good seminar when they were introducing Power Pivot in Microsoft. The Power Pivot teacher in that web video, he was saying is like, most of you don't understand, but if you can write a formula in Excel, you are a programmer.
Hmm.
And he said, as a matter of fact, Excel formula language is probably one of the most complex programming languages there is. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to programmers. People who are programmers, they kind of go crazy when they see these syntax requirements on Excel
Excel.
equations.
Hmm.
My wife, who is a programmer, she started off in programming. I mean, now she's a product manager. She just goes crazy with Excel because she doesn't understand. She's done she's done Midas, she's done all these different kinds of languages her whole life, and she doesn't understand. And then she doesn't understand when she tries to teach me programming, and I get so scared about, hey, there's a comma there. Are you okay to put a space after that? And she's like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, I don't feel comfortable putting a space there, because in Excel that'll make it break. But in
Yeah.
most languages, you can write like you write, a language, and you can use some of those things. In Excel, you can't. So Excel is a unique skill. And if you having that skill, you need to take the responsibility to learn it to the, on the Microsoft training levels. You need to learn it at the advanced level. You don't need to learn how to program. You don't need to learn VBA. It's nice if you can, but you don't really need to go that far. Your statistic, analysis skills on their own, you really don't have to be that hard, but you need to be able to feel very, very, very comfortable with those formulas. When you can do that, you can handle the day-to-day, data loads that you have to put into Excel. I would say out of all the skills, whether you are a business major or whether you've worked in a business and you want to move over, knowing Excel is the key. And then Power BI and Tableau, they mimic a lot of what can be done in Excel, or at least they overlap, and so you can make that transition. The second skill, if you are at a certain level, and I should have learned this, and I've learned that I should have learned this, I should have learned SQL language. It's getting easier because there's better and better visual SQL, so you can drag and drop elements, so you don't need to necessarily learn the language, but you should understand that, because that's the Excel of database developers. Yeah, and so that would be the second one. But no, the one thing that we all rely on is Excel, as finance analysts, is Excel. There's just no getting around it. You have to know PowerPoint, you have to know Word, but you really have to know Excel. And so that's the unifying. I think that's the key to getting into the job, because you have to use it. And my skills were barely at intermediate when I started. And so I was telling you before, the first year that I did this at a very high level for Raytheon Corporation, I was terrified every month because I was just so far behind in my Excel skills. I would have to literally spend hours doing what should have just taken a couple minutes. And now I look back and I laugh, but I didn't, I couldn't trust, using pivot table and using VLOOKUP, because I didn't even know what it did, first of all, and how it worked. And then I was doing it manually, and that was insane. But, I put in the extra hours, and so I got to know my data better. But that was a good thing. But no, nobody should have gone through what I went through those first few months.
Interesting. So it looks like there are a couple of hard skills in terms of Excel and SQL, good to know. And, I think you also mentioned the Tableaus, the Power BIs of the world. But any soft skills, any attitude-related traits that that you would recommend people build or people must have to be successful in the space? I guess anyone can get in, but then to be successful is a different thing, Peter. So anything around that?
It's the next skill that overlaps with with product ownership or in IT. A finance analyst is very close to a product owner. You have to be able to talk to a group that's not aware of what you're doing, and you need to be able to change your way of speaking to them and listening, a lot of listening, so that you can meet their needs. You have to discover what their needs are, and how they understand, their level of understanding, and then you have to understand how you can explain what you're going to give back to them. That is the next biggest soft skill after Excel, maybe SQL, but right after Excel is you have to be able to communicate. And if you're not comfortable with communicating, then you need to be comfortable with asking the question over and over and over until you get it. Hopefully you just ask one more time or two more times, but whatever it takes, you do it until you get the answer, and then you document it, and you begin to build that level of understanding, which that level of understanding with the business partner will automatically build your trust level with them and their confidence in you. And so that's probably the biggest. Interpersonal skills is probably as important as Excel, full stop. I mean, you have to be able to. If you can't communicate, then you're not in the right business. You can't just say, when they ask you, why is this? You can't just say 5. That's not going to work. They'll be like, what happened? It's like, oh, we had a dip in performance, with so and so, and from based on my conversation with them, it was caused by these three things, and so but they've got a mediation plan for that. They're going to mitigation plan, and so this is how they think they're going to stop. That's as much as I was able to find out, and they're like, oh, thank you, and then they'll turn around and be like, okay, so what is your mitigate? They'll turn to the business person and say, oh, okay, Peter said it was this mitigation plan that you're going to do. Oh, okay, what is your mitigation plan? You're invaluable, but you have to be ready to answer to a certain level of detail that has nothing to do with finance. You're reporting back from the business.
Interesting. Yeah. And Peter, I think we've come to the end of this, but I just want to say that before we hit record, we were talking about a lot of different things in terms of career changes and slightly the philosophical aspects of how we feel when we move from one field to another and things like that. I think that's going to be a different podcast, but we really must talk about that maybe on another day. But I think this specific conversation, this specific video has been very insightful. I think I've learned a lot just listening to this, Peter. So I just want to say thank you for your time. I think it's been it's been a great and very insightful conversation, Peter. So thank you for your time.
No problem. Yeah. So yeah, it's yeah, I think that really it comes down to, and this is any career, it's any way of living life, right? You need to take that step. You need to move forward. Ultimately, we're responsible for our own happiness, our own performance, our own fulfillment. Fulfillment sometimes means we have to dig and educate ourselves. We have control of our education, right? That's the biggest difference from when you go to a master's degree, you go to a PhD, they really expect that you are going to teach yourself an entire new skill set. We have that responsibility. So it's the same in your careers. You should not stay in the same position without moving up in some way the entire 40 years or 50 years that you work. We have to do things. We have resources at our disposal. I would have not have got bad grades in the 70s if there had been Google. I could have because I hated going to the library. I hated looking things up in the dictionary. I hated looking up in the encyclopedia. But with Google and my phone, I'm constantly looking things up. So I'm constantly educating myself. And so I've always looked for opportunities that are going to push my knowledge base. Sometimes I'm having it thrust upon me where I have to look for my own, answers that I didn't want to look for, but we end up doing it anyway. But ultimately, you have to know yourself and what gives you the most amount of joy. Where's your comfort zone? I just happen to like finance because it's like being a roadie at a big concert. You're in the backstage. You know what the lights do. You know what the microphones do. You know who the musicians are. You know who the security is. Finance gives you that kind of insight. You get to know the warts and all of the company, and it's really fun to know that. And I've had the opportunity to do it for Nestle and for Disney and for Sony and for Goodwill of America and Raytheon and all these different companies. I've had the ability to do that. I wish I had the T-shirt collection like the roadies. I wish I had a T-shirt from every single company that I've worked for. But it's been great because now I have the confidence where I know that I can step into any company in the world, even if there was a language barrier. I know that at least the language of finance, the language of simple math, the language of Excel, we could get through, almost all of it. So yeah, I hope we get to do another, podcast or two on different topics. But yeah, I think that you just need to, if it interests you, then you just got to figure out a way to go for it. And there's just a few things you have to learn them well, and then be ready to just keep on learning as soon as you get in there.
Absolutely, Peter. I think just listening to you speak, and I think I know you for a while now, I think this is going to be the first of many podcasts, Peter. I'm confident about that.
Good. Yeah, exactly. We'll have to do one on cooking sometime, and I'll show you how to cook Mexican food. And yeah, we'll do that.
Definitely, Peter. Okay, great. Peter. So I think it was great talking. So thank you for your time, and I'm sure we are going to be talking again on a lot of different topics.